Hello everyone, welcome back to Football Unplugged with me, Satvik. In today's episode, we are going to talk about one of the most important position in modern day football and a position that has evolved especially over the turn of the century and a role that I feel is probably the most important position in modern day football. Today, we are going to talk about the role of a fullback. So, if one has to understand the role of the current fullback, one has to sort of go through the evolution of how the modern day fullback is different from the fullback position during the 20th century, or even in the initial couple of years of the 21st century as well. Right. So if you look at football earlier, right, wherein 4-4-2 was probably the most used position, and this is something that we've also discussed in the 4-4-2 formations analysis, the video that we made on 4-4-2, wherein the role of a fullback was majorly to defend, right? The fullback wasn't used as an attacking tool, but the major role of the fullback was to defend, right? And it was a very famous thing, or it was something very common back in the 1990s or 1980s, wherein the lesser of the four defenders would be playing in the fullback position. So the two strongest defenders would be in the center back position, and the lesser of the defenders would be the two fullbacks. So you can imagine how the role has probably evolved from being probably one of the lower priority positions to now currently being one of the most important positions on the pitch. Right. So again, as I've mentioned, earlier fullbacks, the role of fullbacks was clearly defined, was to defend and, defend against the opposition wingers, because 4-4-2 was the majorly used formation back in the day. So if you look at early Manchester United under Sir Alex Ferguson, wherein we had Gary Neville on one side and probably later it was Patrice Evra, both of them were very defensive fullbacks, right? They weren't the most attacking. A very fun stat: Gary Neville, over his entire career, has won more trophies than the goals that he scored. So you can imagine the mentality when it came to fullbacks in the early days. But now the role of fullback has completely changed. I think the transition of the role of the fullback, I think, started from the Brazil national team, right? During the late 1990s, wherein we had Roberto Carlos on the left hand side and Cafu on the right hand side. I think that Brazil team sort of revolutionized the role of a fullback. We've all seen, the legendary free kick of Roberto Carlos. But apart from that, he was as involved as the attack like no other fullback in that day, right? And it was both Cafu and Roberto Carlos. So I think those two players, and especially Roberto Carlos, I think redefined the role of the fullback. Right. I read his interview, one of his interview where he said, as a Brazilian, he loved attacking. He always wanted to join attack. So during his time at Inter Milan during the 1995-96 season, the manager specifically wanted him to stay back and not go attacking, right? And that sort of just made him want to leave the club. And in the next season he made his move to Real Madrid, which proved to be one of the most transformative transfers of football at that particular time, right? Even today, if one has to say. And under Fabio Capello, when Fabio Capello managed Real Madrid, he gave Roberto Carlos the license to go forward, just like Roberto Carlos wanted, right? And he used to say in his interviews that his idea of Roberto Carlos was not to defend, but to use him as an attacking tool, right? So Fabio Capello, we can say, Roberto Carlos and Fabio Capello, how he managed him sort of revolutionized the role. Another reason why we see the role of fullback changing ever since the turn of the century is more and more managers using the 4-3-3 formation. I think ever since Pep Guardiola started managing FC Barcelona as well, I think that changed a lot of things. I think he's one of the pioneers of the 4-3-3 formation, where Dani always, was I consider Dani always along with Cafu to be the greatest right back of all time. And a lot of times, people assume that, Xavi, Iniesta made more assists to Messi during their time at Barcelona. But and there was a time before Suarez and Jordi Alba came into the picture where Dani Alves had made the most number of assists to Lionel Messi and not Xavi and Iniesta. So, Dani Alves also revolutionized the position a lot. And for people of our age, who probably wouldn't have seen too much of Roberto Carlos and Cafu, know Dani Alves as that right back who always used to attack you know but again, this was majorly possible because of the 4-3-3 formation that Pep Guardiola played. If you remember, what usually used to happen in that FC Barcelona team is the three attackers would narrow down. Lionel Messi, Pedro, David Villa, Thierry Henry. A lot of times they would narrow down in the middle of the pitch. That would leave space for the fullbacks of Dani Alves, Eric Abidal, and Jordi Alba in the future to take overlapping run ahead. During his time at FC Barcelona, Dani Alves made over 100 assists, right? A record to be proud even for a playmaker or a playmaking midfielder, right? But that was the sort of impact that Dani Alves had on FC Barcelona. So, that was probably the beginning of the evolution of the not beginning, but one of the major factors that contributed to the developing of the modern day fullback, right? So Pep Guardiola could also be considered as one of the pioneers, right? So for this, modern day fullback, it was very important for the fullbacks to be extremely good on the ball. And right now, if you see any modern day fullback, they are extremely good on the ball. Whether it is Trent Alexander-Arnold for Liverpool, Joao Cancelo for Bayern Munich now and City earlier, and Zinchenko for Arsenal, Marcelo for Real Madrid, Jordi Alba, Dani Alves. These are just great examples of players who were extremely comfortable on the ball, right? And if you remember, right, obviously now Pep Guardiola has adopted a different system, but when he joined City, he flushed out a lot of money on fullbacks, right? You remember Mendy coming in, you remember City signing Bakary Sanya, you remember City signing Danilo as well, uh, and uh, City using Kolarov as well. So a lot of investment, almost 200 million, was spent by Pep Guardiola over his first 3, 4, 4, 5 years when he wanted his ideal fullback, right? And there he also developed a new role called the inverted fullback as well, and that is something that we are going to also talk about. But yes, when it comes to requirement of the modern day fullback, the idea is for the player to be extremely good on the ball, right? And if we have to take example of Liverpool, I think Liverpool is also one of the best examples of two modern day fullbacks. you know Arnold and Robertson broke multiple records of creating chances, giving assists when Liverpool were at their peak during the 1920 season when they won the Premier League. They were in Champions League finals. They also won Champions League. Both of these players were absolutely pivotal in Liverpool's success. So what would usually happen, right? When a team is playing with a 4-3-3 in a modern day football with a modern day fullback, what would happen? Let's take Liverpool's team for example. What would happen is the three forwards, right? Both the Sane, Salah, and Roberto Firmino would again compact and leave spaces for the fullbacks to go ahead. A lot of times Roberto Firmino would drop on, play as a false nine, and then Salah and Mane would take up the empty spaces up front, right? But another requirement for the modern day fullback to succeed is having defensive minded midfielders, And that is something what you observed with Liverpool, where, Naby Keita, Fabinho, Jordan Henderson, even Gini Wijnaldum were more defensive minded players rather than, playmakers, right? And again, the reason being, since these fullbacks are ahead, are up top a lot of times, they need these midfielders to cover up the gaps left by the overlapping runs of the fullback, wherein the left-sided midfielder would, cut the gaps created by Andy Robertson going up front, and Jordan Henderson, who played on the right-hand side of midfield, would cover the right-hand side of the midfield in order to prevent the opposition from counter-attacking in a case that Liverpool loses the ball up front, right? So it is very important for these midfielders to be more defensive minded midfielders in order to cover up as and when the fullbacks go up attacking, right? So this is one of the major characteristics when teams play with high positioned fullbacks, right? So this was something that was done by Manchester City, and this was something that was done by Liverpool, and something that was done by Manchester City is something new that Pep Guardiola does, is this inverted fullback, right? What would happen is one of the fullbacks would come into the midfield, and the other fullback would take the position up top, especially when Cancelo was playing on the left hand side and Kyle Walker was playing as a right back. What would happen is Cancelo would usually go up, usually be playing on the wings or on the attacking flank, and Kyle Walker would join Rodri at the center of the midfield. This is the role that John Stones is playing currently, because Cancelo is now not Cancelo is now out and Kyle Walker isn't played too much. But in the early days, that was what was happening, where Cancelo would be the one who was attacking, and Kyle Walker would join Rodri at the center of the midfield, and hence create a formation of 3-2-4-1. Right, so that is the formation that Pep Guardiola uses, or Pep Guardiola used. So that is how the role of a fullback has evolved over the turn of the century. Wherein looking at fullbacks in the early days, where 4-4-2 was the formation that was being used. We've already given examples of Gary Neville or Patrice Evra. And even if you have to compare it to modern day football and teams who play a 4-4-2, taking example of Atletico Madrid under Diego Simeone, uh, Luis Felipe and Wafran were a lot of times the left back and the right back, and their major role would be to defend, right? So the role of a modern day fullback also has to do a lot with the formation that the manager chooses, right? Uh, even under Even Burnley under Sean Dyche played with a 4-4-2, wherein the two fullbacks would be very defense-minded fullbacks, right? And on the contrary, teams like Bayern Munich, teams like City, Barcelona, Liverpool, who played with 4-3-3, use the modern day fullback or attacking fullback to its highest prowess, right? So that is it. That is us understanding the role of the modern day fullback and how the role of a fullback has changed over the turn of the century, and how teams have been using fullbacks not as a tool to defend, but as a tool to create goal scoring opportunities, and to just be a very attack minded team. So let me know, what do you feel about the role of a fullback in modern day football, and what is your preference? Would you want the defender? Would you want the fullback to be defensive minded, or would you want the defender, the fullbacks, to be very attack minded? Someone like a Trent Alexander-Arnold, who is great while attacking, but obviously has a mistake in him when it comes to defense. Thank you so much. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Like, share, and subscribe. And please let me know your feedback on how the channel is performing and whether the content that you find on the channel is valuable and informative. Thank you.